No one ever forgets the first encounter with raw, unfiltered cruelty. Out in the relentless expanse of the desert, some wounds run deeper than the sun's unforgiving glare. Ethan Cole believed he had faced the worst the West could throw at a man. He had witnessed brawls erupting into gunfire in the dust-choked saloons, seen men swing from ropes as dawn broke, and trudged past bodies left to rot in the dirt. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what awaited that blistering afternoon just outside Tombstone. There she was, a young woman, bound tight against the trunk of a massive saguaro cactus, the kind that endures centuries, rooted in the earth like a silent witness to time. Her body sagged forward, the cactus spines puncturing her flesh. Her dress was tattered and filthy, barely clinging to her slender frame, and her arms and legs bore bruises so dark and jagged, it was as if some cruel hand had painted them there. Her head drooped low, and Ethan feared she might already be gone. He reined in his horse, kicking up dust as he descended onto the scorched soil. For a long, heavy moment, he simply stood there, his throat dry, heart pounding. He had seen rough justice before, the drunkards beaten senseless, thieves strung from ropes, but this was different. This was not justice. This was pure, unadulterated hate. The desert's sun hammered down like molten iron. Sweat streaked his face, and yet his gaze remained fixed on her. Who could commit such savagery? Who could abandon a woman to the merciless blaze of the desert? The longer he stared, the more his stomach churned. The desert was merciless, but the men who did this, they were worse than the desert itself. Then he heard it, a faint whisper, cracked and nearly carried away by the hot wind. He stepped closer, boots crunching over dry earth, his heart hammering in his chest. Her lips trembled as she murmured a plea, 3 words that struck him harder than any bullet. Please free me. They weren't just words. They were the last flicker of life in a world set on snuffing her out. Ethan froze, torn between rage and despair. He didn't know her name or why she was left to suffer like this. All he knew was that she had been subjected to cruelty so raw and deliberate that only one thing mattered now: saving her. His hands shook as he grasped the rope. The knots were cruelly tight, biting into her skin, tied by hands determined to extinguish her entirely. He tugged with all his strength, loosening them slowly, revealing more of her battered body. Each bruise, each cut, drove home the truth: this was not punishment. This was execution in all but name. When the last knot gave way, she sagged forward, and Ethan caught her before she could hit the ground. Her skin was blistering from the sun, her chest heaved with shallow, ragged breaths. She was weightless, as though all her strength had been drained. Supporting her, Ethan wondered if she would ever stand again. Her lips moved, trembling, forming words that chilled him through and through. "I was cursed," she whispered. Ethan's jaw clenched. He had heard this before in towns like Tombstone, folk quick to blame curses when faced with what they could not understand. It was easier to fear than to see the truth. He glanced at her wrists, where the rope had gouged deep into her skin. The marks told a story of more than mere cruelty. They spoke of an intent to erase her from the world entirely. But her eyes, glassy with tears, held a spark, a fragile ember of resilience. This was not some malevolent spirit. This was flesh and blood, a young woman crushed under superstition and human malice, yet still unwilling to surrender to despair. In that endless, sun-scorched silence, Ethan realized what had to be done. The desert had no mercy, but he could. He would not walk away. He would stand and he would fight for her, for the life that had been so violently threatened, for the hope that still glimmered faintly in her eyes. Her story was written in bruises, but her spirit, though battered, was not yet broken. And as Ethan steadied her in his arms, he understood that some battles were not fought with guns or vengeance but with the quiet determination to save what remained of humanity amidst the cruelty of the world. The firelight danced erratically, casting long, quivering shadows across the desert floor. Clara clutched at it as though her life depended on holding something steady in a world that had offered her nothing but pain. Ethan's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, his hat pulled low to shield her face from the harsh glare of the sun. In his mind, the voices of the town still rang, sharp and accusing, their eyes cold with suspicion. He thought of the ease with which people could abandon compassion when fear and ignorance gripped their hearts. Looking down at Clara, he wondered what kind of justice would leave a defenseless woman to suffer so cruelly. She stirred slightly, her lips trembling as she whispered, "They said my remedies were cursed, they called me dangerous." Just 3 words, yet they cut deeper than the jagged thorns that had scraped her skin. Anger flared inside Ethan, raw and unyielding. The word, which was their excuse, their shield to justify cruelty, and it was enough for them to leave her broken under the sun. Lifting her carefully to the saddle, Ethan's mind raced with a single question. If they had branded her a witch once, what lengths would they go to ensure her silence next? The desert had ears, and news traveled faster than water in these parts. By the time the first stars peeked through the evening sky, shadows were already stirring along the winding trail. He carried Clara to an old, abandoned shack not far from his property. It was the only refuge he could think of, a place where she could rest, unseen and untouched, even if only for a little while. He laid her gently on a worn bedroll and offered her water from his canteen. For the first time in hours, her eyes closed, a fragile peace settling over her features. Ethan allowed himself a brief sigh, though he knew too well that tranquility in these lands was always fleeting. The crunch of gravel under boots was the first warning, followed by voices harsh and taunting, slicing through the quiet night. Ethan stepped outside, Colt in hand, the weight of the gun grounding him. 3 figures emerged, familiar faces from the Tombstone Saloon. Alone, they were cowards, but together, their menace multiplied. Their gaze darted around, searching for Clara, predatory and intent. Ethan let silence stretch between them, heavy and unyielding, giving them a moment to feel the tension press in like desert heat. Then he spoke, calm yet cold, "She isn't going anywhere with you." The tallest of the trio spat into the dirt, venom in his words. "She's a witch, Cole. You don't want to do this." Ethan's jaw hardened. He thought of the burns on her arms, the bruises on her ribs, the hours spent under the merciless sun. Fury like molten iron surged through him. In one fluid motion he raised his Colt. The crack of the gunshot tore through the night, the bullet slicing cleanly through the brim of the man's hat, which tumbled to the ground. A tense silence fell. Gunpowder lingered thickly in the air, and Ethan's voice cut through it like stone. "The next one won't miss." The men froze, bravado evaporating in the desert wind. Muttering curses, they slunk back into the shadows, leaving only the dust and their shattered pride behind. Ethan kept his finger on the trigger, aware that this confrontation was merely the start. Inside, Clara stirred, murmuring in her half-sleep. Ethan muttered under his breath, the weight of the town's hatred pressing down on him. They wanted her gone, erased from their world. But he would not allow it. As smoke curled from his Colt, illuminated by the starlight, the sense of a long, dangerous journey ahead settled over him. By dawn, Ethan had hardly slept. He sat outside the shack, rifle across his knees, the desert changing colors from inky black to pale gray to blinding gold. Clara lay inside, finally breathing evenly, but Ethan knew calm never lingered long in the west. The faint creak of saddles and the thudding of hooves warned him before he could see the crowd forming on the horizon. Dust spiraled upward as a dozen or more men and women, even a few boys brandishing sticks, surged toward the shack, their fear twisted into aggression. Ethan rose to meet them, hand on his weapon. Bullets alone would not deter a town, but he would not falter. The leader's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, "Cole, hand her over. She's dangerous. Cursed." Ethan's teeth clenched. He thought of the scars on her body, the humiliation she had endured, the betrayal of the world she once trusted. He knew that what awaited him next would test every ounce of his skill, courage, and resolve. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see whether justice would prevail or whether fear would claim another victim. A shiver ran through the crowd when she murmured the word, "Witch." Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his voice, projecting over the rising clamor. "She poses no threat to any of you. The only crime she's guilty of is being abandoned here, left to suffer by those who should have protected her." Shouts erupted, raw and furious. Some called him a liar, others demanded vengeance. Fire, rope, blood. Ethan's fingers gripped the handle of his revolver, pulse hammering in his chest. He could take a few of them down, maybe force the others to scatter, but he knew any violence would only turn the desert into a canvas of red before the sun had set. Then, from the middle of the throng, a figure emerged. Unlike the men with gun belts and dusty hats, he wore a long black coat, slow and deliberate in every step. Reverend John Whitaker, the town's pastor, carried an authority that had nothing to do with guns. The sun had weathered his face, carved lines of experience into it, but his eyes burned with a steady, unwavering resolve. He raised a hand, and the mob fell silent, the wind itself seeming to pause. His voice rolled out, calm but commanding, "You label her a witch. You say she is cursed. But I see her differently. She is a child of God. Look at her. See the damage done here. If you spill a drop more of blood, it will not be justice, it will be sin." The weight of his words settled over the crowd like a stone. Uneasy murmurs rippled through them. Weapons began to lower. Heads bowed. Ethan's breath stayed caught in his chest, eyes fixed on every subtle shift. The pastor's gaze swept across the faces in the crowd, piercing and deliberate. Scripture tells us, "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." Which of you can truthfully say that today? The silence was absolute, heavy as the desert heat. Slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. A stick clattered to the ground. A rifle dropped. Mothers pulled their children back, and one by one, the anger dissipated, leaving only quiet hesitation. Ethan let his shoulders relax slightly, though his revolver remained close. Inside the shack, Claire stirred, her weak voice carrying a fragile hope. Ethan knew the night could still bring danger. The mercy of daylight was not always enough, but for now, the immediate threat had passed. Once the mob had vanished, leaving only swirling dust in their wake, Ethan lifted Claire carefully onto his horse, cradling her as though she were fragile porcelain. Together, they rode away from Tombstone, leaving judgment and fear behind. Each mile stretched out before them like a promise of safety. For the first time in days, Claire felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope. The desert, wide and unending, no longer seemed a place of threat, but a space of possibility. When they finally arrived at Ethan's modest ranch near San Xavier Dell, relief washed over Claire. She could breathe, finally, in a world that had not abandoned her. Ethan provided food, water, and the quiet security of care. Color returned to her cheeks, strength to her voice. At dusk, she would sit beneath the fading sun, wrapped in a blanket, while Ethan quietly worked nearby, sharpening tools, tending gear, ever vigilant. Claire had been condemned by ignorance, branded by fear. But on this small plot of land, she discovered that gentleness and steadfastness could overpower cruelty. And Ethan, a man who had long believed his life of purpose was over, realized something profound. It is never too late to act with courage, never too late to save another soul. The desert tested all who walked it, but it also revealed what one could endure, and what one could protect. Ethan could have turned away, leaving Claire to the judgment of others. Instead, he chose to stand firm, discovering a form of love neither loud nor passionate, but quiet, enduring, and sacrificial. In a world full of harshness, the real question remains: when someone suffers at the hands of ignorance or cruelty, will you avert your eyes, or will you stand, unwavering, to defend them? If this story resonates, if you feel the heat of the desert, the weight of choices, and the courage it takes to protect another, let it move you. Share it with those who believe in bravery. Remember the power of standing up, of choosing mercy over rage. The West is full of tales waiting to be told, and everyone reminds us that even in the harshest lands, hope, courage, and humanity endure.